Hello, I'm Dick Schubert. The American Red Cross is very pleased that you're interested in learning first aid. We've been in the business of first aid for over 70 years, developing and perfecting life-saving techniques that have been taught in classes all over the nation. We know many of you have considered learning first aid before, but lack the time to fit it into your busy lives. Now, with this videotape, you can learn these techniques at home, at your own pace, so that you can protect your family and friends against illness and accidents. This video cassette contains a tremendous amount of material to prepare you for different kinds of medical emergencies. It's been divided into 3 portions, and we suggest that you watch each part on a different day, as there is simply too much to learn in one sitting. While you can work alone, it's best to work with at least one other person. Practicing together is the most effective way to learn, and it happens to be more fun too. When you see this symbol, it means that you should practice along with the instructor. Take part in the action. An important advantage of this cassette is that you can play it over and over again, practicing techniques until you've mastered them. Several brief quizzes have been included to sharpen your skills. This cassette was prepared as an introduction to first aid. We recommend that you view it every 6 to 12 months to keep the material fresh. For your convenience, a brochure has been included as a handy reference guide to the material. After mastering the first aid techniques in this cassette, you can build on your skills by enrolling in a Red Cross first aid or CPR course. Your local Red Cross chapter can tell you when and where first aid courses are being offered. Thanks for taking the time to learn and joining with the Red Cross in the business of saving lives. We'd like to welcome you now to the living room of one of our video couples, with whom you will successfully learn the techniques of first aid.
Bob, it was really terrific you could spare the time for us.
Well, I don't usually make house calls, but what are neighbors for? Let me ask you guys, how come you suddenly turned on to first aid?
Well, Joe and I decided that is something we ought to do because of the kids.
For me, when I'm out covering a news story, I can see how important it is. I've seen it save lives.
Not forgetting that first aid can save your own life. You know, what sold me on first aid was that, well, the secretary in our office saved John Colbert when he had a heart attack. She kept him going until help arrived. His life was in the hand of a 100-pound girl who just finished a Red Cross CPR program.
What 100-pound girl was that?
The secretary who saved John.
Oh, I didn't know you weighed her.
What's all this, Linda? It looks delicious.
Just a little something to keep us going.
Well, if you're going to go back to school, this is the way to do it. In style, huh?
You know, I actually feel nervous. I'm a teacher. I forgot how to be a student.
What if Bob finds out that I can't stand the sight of blood?
Hey, everybody's a little jumpy when they face up to something new.
I wish I could be as calm and collected as your friend over there.
Annie? Well, she's a woman of vast experience. She's taken a lot of hard knocks and survived them all.
Her kid looks pretty tough, too.
Well, never lets out a whimper, just like her mama.
If you want coffee, tea, or milk, it's in the outer lobby.
Well, thanks, Linda, but maybe later? We've got a lot of work to do tonight, and why don't we save the refreshments for a break?
This man gets right down to business. I like that.
Now, first, let me say that as your friend and neighbor, it's a pleasure to be here. And second, let me say that what I'm going to show you should be taken as an intro to first aid. And I hope I can get you guys interested enough to take further instruction.
Understood, Bob.
This is a beginning.
Well, then let's begin at the beginning. Well, as you know, we'll be meeting for several sessions because there's a lot to go through. Tonight we'll cover the basic principles of first aid, treating for shock, and what to do for respiratory emergencies. Next, we'll take up CPR, bleeding, and poisoning. And then we'll deal with burns, fractures, and some common household emergencies. And finally, we'll discuss how to avoid most of these emergencies.
Sounds like a lot.
Quite frankly, it is. That's one reason why we're taking the material in chunks. And you'll have time to practice each session's material before we take up new material. Now, I like to take it in this order because one thing sort of builds on another, okay?
Fine by me, sure.
Sounds good.
So let's get to it. Now, say you're out walking, and as you look across the street, you see a kid under a bicycle. You run up to see if you can help. Now, the kid's not moving, and the bike is on top of him. What's the first thing you do, Charlotte?
Scream.
Okay, Charlotte, that's natural enough, but it's not very productive. Joe?
I'd see if there's something I could do. Some way to help. Run to the telephone.
Now, don't scream and don't run. The first thing to do is get yourself ready for action. Now, you've got to be in control to take control.
How do you do that? Especially when it's your own kid on the bike.
Well, one way is to take a few slow, deep breaths. Compose yourself. Force yourself to think. Concentrate on what you need to do to be of help in this situation. Now, if a victim senses that you know what you're doing, that actually helps the victim relax. And that's important.
Now, wait a minute. I'm not sure that I would ever get used to the sight of blood or broken bones. I mean, how am I going to project a positive attitude to the victim when I don't even like to think about it?
Well, people generally don't, but most of you aren't that far away from being able to take control. You see, most people think they won't be able to handle a situation when, in reality, you don't have to be a doctor or even a highly trained first aid expert to be able to do some very important, helpful things. Now, most people have much more common sense, knowledge, and ability than they think they have, and they can handle a situation. Now, on top of that, there's the confidence that comes with knowing how to handle an emergency. And that's why we're here, right?
I suppose.
Now, who is the first person to consider?
The worst hurt?
No. Yourself. Get yourself and the victim out of further danger from fire, water, explosion, traffic, whatever. Now, see, this will be one of the few times we'll talk about moving a victim. So, here's the first principle for a first aider. 1, don't move the victim unless you absolutely must. Move only if he's in further danger.
Now, why is that?
Well, in an accident situation, you really can't tell what injuries the victim might have going on inside his body, so-called internal injuries. And your moving him might complicate those internal injuries, okay? So, 1, don't move the victim unless you absolutely must. And then 2, restore or maintain breathing and heartbeat. 3, control bleeding. 4, treat poisoning. 5, treat for shock. And 6, send for medical help. And believe me, after a bit of practice, you'll find yourself functioning automatically. You'll know what to do and when. Now, just for now, let's deal with number 6, send for medical help. Now, even though it's listed as number 6, it's something you should try to do as soon as possible. For instance, if there's someone around, have them make a phone call.
Well, I guess I could tell somebody to make a call without too many lessons.
Well, you'd be surprised. That call can mean life or death. What and how you communicate can make the difference. You've got to remember that it's more than just a matter of yelling for help. The person on the other end of the line needs to know certain things. 1, what happened and where? 2, how many victims are involved? 3, what's being done for the victims? And 4, a phone number for possible callback. And never, ever hang up first. Not until you're certain the person you're talking to has all the information they want.
I see what you mean. There's a better way, even when it comes to a telephone call.
Are we forgetting something?
What's that?
Well, if you're giving an address, I think you should try and have someone outside to meet the rescue squad. I once saw an ambulance crew trying to read house numbers a detective couldn't even find.
That's a good point.
And if it's at night, keep the porch lights burning.
If you've got a porch.
Thanks.
Now, all of these are good ideas. What it comes down to is making it easy as possible for medical help to find you. Here, let's practice a call for help. Now, there you are, Joe. I'll be the operator. Emergency.
Well, there's been an accident. My wife fell from a stepladder and hit her head on the kitchen counter. And there's a cut on her forehead. I put a bandage on it. We're at 111 Jefferson Drive. That's between Exeter Avenue and Lemon Street.
Is it a private residence?
Yes, it is. It's a white frame house. I'll leave the porch light on and the front door open. The telephone number here is 345-0002. Have you got all the information you need?
Yes, we'll dispatch an ambulance to 111 Jefferson Drive. That was nice, Joe.
When you have to call the ambulance, rescue squad, or the hospital, there are certain things you must tell the operator. What are they? What happened and where? How many victims? What's been done for the victims? The phone number of the phone you are using. Special instructions to get to the scene. And remember, make sure that they have all the information they need before you hang up.
Okay, I know we went a little out of order, but now you can see that even a phone call for help needs some practice. And it's one of the most important things you can do. Now, let's go back to the top of the list.
Well, Bob, I can see that moving a victim is dangerous. But is it realistic to assume we're going to find a victim nice and neat? You know, all arranged?
No, what I think he means is that you don't move a victim unless it's absolutely necessary, and then you do it with extreme care.
When you say absolutely must, do you mean, well, say I find a victim bent over on the seat of a car. What, I just leave him there?
If you can sustain life support and control severe bleeding, yes, you try not to move him.
Okay.
Okay. Now, let's assume you come upon a victim you don't have to move. Your next task is to make sure the victim is breathing and has a heartbeat. Now, always remember, without air, a person has about 4 to 6 minutes before brain damage and death result.
Well, what about severe bleeding?
Cope with bleeding after you're sure about respiration and pulse. So, Joe, even before you made that call for help when Charlotte fell off the ladder...
I should have checked for breathing and pulse, huh?
Right. But what would be the first thing you'd do?
Well, I guess the most natural thing to do would be to ask if she was all right.
That's right again. You see, if you ask them, are you all right, and combine it with a tap on the shoulder, if you get a response, if they talk to you, they are breathing and they do have a heartbeat. But if you get no response, then they're unconscious and you...
Check breathing and heartbeat.
Hold on. Slow down. How do you check for breathing?
Yeah. How did I do that?
Okay, if there are no obvious signs of breathing, you're going to use a simple, effective technique that might be just enough to restore breathing fast. It's called the airway step. Here, why don't you take a look at this model. Now, when a person is unconscious on his back, the tongue relaxes and blocks the airway. Now, what we need to do is to open the airway. See? Linda, I need your help. Would you lie down on the floor here? Good. Now, to accomplish the airway step, I place one hand under the neck. I put the other hand on the forehead. I lift the neck gently and push down on the forehead, and I tip the head back until the chin is straight up. Then I listen for breath, I look at the chest for signs of movement, and I feel for breath on my cheek. That's the airway step. Hank, you want to try?
While Hank tries it, you try it. And whenever you see this symbol, try along with us.
Now, Hank puts his hands in the right places. One on the forehead and one under the neck. He lifts gently under the neck and pushes down on the forehead, tilting the head back until the chin is straight up. Good. Then he listens for breath and looks for breathing at the chest. That's good, Hank.
Okay on breath, but what about pulse? I can never find it.
Oh, hold it. If the victim is breathing, then there's got to be a pulse, right?
That's right. Now, if there is breathing, there will be a pulse. But a victim may not be breathing, and then you wouldn't know whether there was a pulse or not. So, I want you to learn how to find a pulse.
You're the teacher.
Now, the wrist pulse can be hard to find. So, we try to use the pulse here at the side of the neck, in the crease.
Hey, I got it.
Now, everybody, find your own neck pulse. Put your fingers on your Adam's apple and slide them into the side, into the crease.
I must be dead. No, wait, I found it.
Me too.
So, after you check for breathing and heartbeat, you'll deal with the bleeding. Now, we'll talk more about bleeding and poisoning at another session. But for now, just remember that no matter what we talk about in the next 3 sessions, the basic principles will guide you through any serious accident situation. Now, let's take a moment and review what we've learned so far.
If you came upon this accident scene and determined that you and the victim face no further danger from traffic, why would you do these 3 steps in the following order? Check breathing and heartbeat, stop the child's bleeding, call for help. You must remember the basic principles. Breathing and heartbeat are always the first vital signs to check. If those signs were stable, you would control bleeding. Then you should call for help immediately. Do not move the child.
Now, there's another first aid procedure you always follow. Any ideas? Well, again, we're out of order on our basic principles list, but I want to talk about treating for shock. Now, the shock I'm talking about is associated with any injury, blood loss, or burn. Shock may come with illness or poisoning. Now, the danger is always there, so the name of our game is shock prevention. And we might as well mention shock now, since you've always got to be aware of it.
What exactly is shock? You can't see it.
Well, shock is a depressed state of vital body functions, a kind of slowing down. Now, pain can make shock worse. Even rough handling during treatment or delay in treatment can make shock all the more serious. And shock can be very serious. It can kill.
That's serious.
But if you can't see shock, but you know the potential for shock exists in just about every accident or illness, then you assume it's there and treat for it. Does that make sense?
It sure does, Charlotte. You always treat for shock. Prevent it from taking hold or getting worse. Now, the treatment's simple. You want to prevent the victim from losing body heat. So, if the victim is lying on a cold surface, you try to place a blanket or some insulating material like newspaper under or around the body, with as little movement as possible. Now, usually you'd cover the victim to keep him warm. But remember, you want to maintain body temperature, not raise it. So consider the environment. If it's a warm day, you use less covering. Extremes of hot or cold must be avoided.
Common sense comes into the picture again.
Right.
So if the victim was wearing heavy clothing on a warm day, I might not need to tuck more warm stuff around him.
But if the victim was wearing a bathing suit...
Keep your mind on your work.
Okay.
Didn't I read someplace about raising the victim's feet?
Well, as a rule, it's better to keep the victim flat, lying down. I mean, what's our first basic principle?
Don't move the victim unless it's absolutely necessary. I get you.
Sometimes the victim won't know he's in danger of shock until it gets severe. You've got to take charge. Make sure the victim is protected. And with shock, as with any emergency, get medical help as soon as possible. Now remember, first aid is a delaying action, not a substitute for doctor's care.
The fifth basic principle is to prevent shock. You need something to prevent the victim from losing body heat. What do you see in this room that you could use as an insulator? The Afghan? The throw rug? Newspapers? Curtains?
Okay, Hank, I'd like you to try something with us here. Now, what I'd like you to do is to think up a situation where there's an accident or emergency. Put yourself into the story and tell me how you'd handle a situation.
I don't know.
Well, keep it simple for now and remember what we've learned so far.
Well, it was one of those mornings. It had snowed recently, and it was my morning to go running 3 times a week. No excuses.
This is definitely a story. Running in the snow in the morning, you?
Quiet. I'm creating. I was on the last leg.
You mean your last legs?
I was on the last leg. And I noticed a man lying on the ground. I don't think anyone could be that dedicated in doing push-ups in the snow, so I assume something is wrong. I run up to him and I ask, are you all right?
Now hold it. Think it through. Tap him gently on the shoulder and then ask.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I run up to him, tap him on the shoulder and ask, are you all right? Are you all right? I yell for help. Help! There's nobody around. I'm I'm on my own.
Think about what you have to do.
I compose myself. Remember the 6 basic principles. And I begin. I open the airway and check for breathing. He is. I look for bleeding. I see none. And then I look for a way to get some medical help. Now listen, I found this guy. He's passed out on the road here. Now, here's what you have to do. You call the emergency number.
Okay.
Tell him I'm here. I'm on Devlin Road, right by the brook on the corner of Dorchester Avenue.
Okay.
Now, tell him I'm going to stay here until they come. And tell him to come quick, because I don't have much to keep him warm with.
Okay, good.
All right?
Right away.
Tell him I'll be here with him, all right?
Thanks.
I would return to the victim. I'd try to keep him as warm as I could and keep checking on him to make sure he continues to breathe.
That was nice, Hank.
You know, the funny part of all this is that I do feel more like I could handle an emergency now. And it's not only because I know more. I think it's because I've thought it through, sort of been there in my mind.
Hey, Bob, what do you do when you can't find anything that will help keep the victim warm? Like in Hank's story, when the only thing available was his jacket.
Well, you have to do what you can with what you have to work with.
Well, I feel much better now. I can run right out and collapse, right?
Well, you better wait until I learn more. I'll be much better later on. So, here we are. Me, all of you, and one passed-out mannequin.
You'd be surprised at just how wonderful a passed-out mannequin can be.
Well, she looks like a frozen Greta Garbo.
She's a real doll.
You know, she has the same expression I get in the morning, except she's a lot paler.
What did you say her name was?
Her name's Annie, and she's accident-prone. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is you're going to save her.
Oh, Annie, if there's anything you want, just ask.
Well, she's shy, but she's going to be a big help. Now, Annie, here, let's get her down onto the floor.
Well, what's her problem?
You find out.
Annie, are you all right?
There's no response. She's unconscious.
I would yell for help. Help.
No answer. Concentrate on what you've learned, on what you know, and on what you've got to do next.
I don't want to move her. She's in no further danger. I've got to check for breathing.
Airway step.
I place one hand on the forehead, and I put the other hand under her neck. I lift under the neck and push down gently on the forehead, and I tip the head back until the chin is straight up.
Put your ear near her nose and mouth. Look for the chest to rise. Listen for breath, and feel for breath on her cheek.
Now, there's no obvious signs of breathing.
Bob, if Annie was on her stomach, what would Hank do to check for her breathing?
Well, you look at her back for signs of movement, and you feel with your hand at her mouth and nose.
And if there's still no signs of breathing?
What next?
Well, if the airway step fails... Oh, thanks, Hank. Then we go on to the quick step, which is called the quick step because you do it as quick as you can. Now, you keep the head tipped back. Now, I pinch the nose closed with one hand. Take a big breath. I'm going to cover the victim's mouth with my own and give 4 quick breaths, one right after another. Now, then I pause and check pulse and breathing for at least 5 seconds.
Well, why 5 seconds?
Well, the pulse may be slow enough so you won't feel it right away. Now, it's important to wait until you're sure about pulse, because whether you find a pulse or not determines what you do next. Now, if there is a pulse, but no breathing, we move to mouth where you're actually breathing for the victim. And what you do is you pinch the nose closed, cover the mouth, and blow into the lungs 1 breath every 5 seconds. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000.
How long do you keep that up?
As long as it takes. Don't give up.
Wait a minute. It's one thing to put your mouth over a dummy's mouth or to get that close to someone in your family, but I'm not sure I'm going to want to put my mouth onto somebody's face that I don't even know. Somebody that might be real sick.
Well, that's a natural reaction, but it's one that you need to get over. Now, there are a lot of things that might make giving first aid unpleasant, but there are little fears that you can overcome.
Like the sight of blood.
I know it sounds silly, but I know that in the back of my mind, I might be worrying about getting my clothes stained.
And what about getting germs from giving mouth to someone?
Well, you're right, Linda. That's a possibility. Now, you can deal with that by placing a handkerchief over the victim's mouth and giving mouth to mouth through it. But even these little fears are legitimate concerns. However, if you think about them now, ahead of time, you'll be prepared, and you won't let them slow you down when the real thing happens and seconds count.
But what can you do to deal with feelings like these?
Well, a couple of things. Those few deep breaths we talked about taking as you're preparing yourself, they can help you stay cool and prepare yourself for the fact that you may have to deal with a lot of blood, or risk getting some germs, or even get your clothes dirty. You should be reminding yourself that all these things are unimportant compared to the help that you might be able to provide, and how good that's going to make you feel. Okay, Charlotte, you want to try? All right, first the airway step. Okay, gently. Good. Check for breathing. None?
No.
No? All right, quick step. Good. Good. Now, check the pulse and breathing. Pulse on the neck, next to the Adam's apple, close to you.
Okay.
Good. Okay, you better go to mouth.
It's one breath every 5 seconds.
Right.
1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000.
Okay, Charlotte, now a better way to count that out would be to breathe. Then it's 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, then breathe. Why don't you try a few?
Okay. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000.
One breath every 5 seconds. How often do you check for breathing?
Well, you check breathing and pulse every minute or so, but if there's no response in the breathing department, go back to the mouth to mouth. Now, don't quit. You should keep it up until help arrives. See, mouth to mouth breathing is one of the most important lessons you can learn. You should know it like you know your name.
Practicing could be fun, depending on the victim.
Beast. Bob, suppose the victim is an infant.
Well, I want to prove to you that you have more knowledge than you think you do. Here you are, one infant. Now, Charlotte, you tell me what you think you'd do, and what I'll tell you is that the whole thing is very similar.
Okay, well, it seems to me that if I have to do essentially the same things, I would have to make them smaller, gentler.
You're doing fine, Charlotte. Now, what do you do first here?
Well, first I'd see if she was unconscious. I tap her, I shout at her, see if she responds.
Right. Now, what you do with a baby is you tap the bottoms of the feet. They're much more sensitive.
Okay.
All right.
Now, if there was no response, I do the airway step. Tip the head back.
Right. Gently. Not as far as you would for an adult.
Check for breathing. None. A quick step.
Right. Now, with the breathing for a child, you cover the mouth and the nose. You have to open your mouth very wide, and you breathe very, very softly. I mean, you're filling tiny little lungs here. Easy. Good.
Then check for pulse.
Right.
How do you check for a pulse on a baby?
Well, the best place is right here in the middle of the upper arm. Okay?
Okay, I find a pulse, but there is no breathing. Better go to mouth to mouth?
Now, for a baby, the rhythm is one breath every 3 seconds. All right? So we count it out. Breathe. Good.
1,000,
to 1,000. Breathe. You count it.
1,000 to 1,000.
Go. Uh-huh. Good.
1,000 to 1,000.
Well, no, wait. If the rhythm for a grown-up is one breath every 5 seconds, and an infant is one every 3 seconds, what do? Split the difference on a subteen?
You got it. Now, there, you see? Like I said, common sense plays a big part in filling in the gaps in your knowledge. Well, you did a really nice job.
Thanks. But I did have some basics from the discussion about grown-ups. You know, the thing that bothers me is when a baby chokes. I don't think I'd be able to handle that one.
Well, it is frightening, but if a baby's coughing, leave it alone. See, coughing's the natural way to get something out of the airway. But if a baby can't cough, cry, or breathe, it may have swallowed a foreign object that's completely blocking the airway. Now, if a baby's conscious, here, let me show you. Okay. You lay it face down, straddling your arm, with the head lower than the chest. You support the head with your hand around the jaw and under the chest. Rest your arm on your thigh and give 4 back blows rapidly between the shoulder blades with the heel of your hand.
What if the back blows don't work?
Well, then you turn the baby carefully, giving support to the back, neck, and head. Now, with the baby on its back, you push on the chest 4 times with your fingertips on the baby's breastbone between the nipples. Now, your hand should come in from the side so that your fingertips run up and down the breastbone, not across it. All right? Now, for an older child, position the child face down over your knees or a chair with the head lower than the body. Now, an older child requires harder back blows. For chest thrusts, use the heel of one hand, not the fingertips. Repeat the pattern. 4 back blows, 4 chest thrusts, until the object is expelled.
Well, how do you know how hard to hit?
Well, remember, you're trying to dislodge something stuck in the throat. The blow should create some movement in the body of the person you're hitting.
But what about adults? Now, there is some kind of special maneuver for choking adults, isn't there?
Right, and let's deal with that right now. Charlotte, care to sit down? Now, the signs of a person who's choking are fairly obvious. They might suddenly collapse while eating or begin to wheeze, gasp, gag, cough, grab for the throat. Now, the first thing you do is ask, can you talk? A person with a blocked airway can't talk, breathe, or cough. But if the victim is gagging and coughing, let him alone. But watch him for signs of further trouble. See, normal coughing is the best remedy. If a person can speak, don't try to remove an object from the airway. But if the airway's blocked, well, Joe, come here. Now, I'm going to demonstrate a technique. You should practice it, but when you do, be careful not to hurt your partner. Now, you stand behind and just to the victim's side. Now, if the victim is standing or sitting, you support the victim with one hand on his chest, tip his head down, you let gravity help you with it. Now, you give 4 sharp blows over the spine. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, as rapidly as possible. You hit with the heel of your hand, hard enough to dislodge the object, okay? Now, the pattern of back blows is the same for infants and children, but now we come to something different. If the object's not expelled, you give 4 abdominal thrusts. You place the thumb side of your fist between the waist and the bottom edge of the rib cage. Now, never push on the rib cage. You grab the fist with your other hand and press it into the victim's abdomen with a quick inward and upward thrust. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thanks a lot, Joe. Now, if the combination of back blows and thrusts doesn't work at first, you repeat the process as long as the victim is conscious. Don't give up. If the victim begins to cough, stop. Let him cough the object up. See, coughing is more effective than any technique we have to help.
Suppose the victim is me.
Try to let the people around you know what's happening. See, if you can't speak, grab your throat. Now, that's a universal SOS. If you're alone, give yourself thrusts. Press your fist between your rib cage and waist with a quick inward and upward thrust. Or lean forward and press your abdomen quickly over a firm object like the back of a chair.
Suppose the victim is a very heavy person. They wouldn't be able to bend over, and I might not be able to get my arms around their stomach.
Well, with a very heavy person or a pregnant woman, you'll use chest thrusts. Here, Linda, let me demonstrate on you. Now, you reach around the chest from behind with your arms under the victim's armpits. You place the thumb side of your fist on the middle of the breastbone at about the level of the armpits. You grab your fist with your other hand and pull straight back with quick thrusts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks, Linda. By the way, when you practice these techniques, don't give actual back blows or hard thrusts. Save that for the real thing. Now, let's everybody take a second to find the place where your breastbone ends, down near the stomach. Now, that spot is very delicate. And when you do chest thrusts, never press on that spot. Now, you could do more damage to the organs underneath. So, the lower end of the breastbone is off limits.
Well, maybe I'll have a little stop sign tattooed right here.
Oh, cute.
Bob, in dealing with these breathing problems, we've been moving the victims around a lot. Now, doesn't that go against our first principle? Don't move the victim.
Don't move the victim unless you have to.
Well, how do you know if you have to?
Well, in the respiratory emergencies we've just dealt with, restoring breathing takes precedence, as will restoring heartbeat, which we'll take up when we get to CPR. Now, in other situations where the victim's safe from further injuries, is breathing, and has a heartbeat, it's best not to move the victim.
I suppose the more you learn, the better you'll be prepared to make these decisions.
That's right. Well, that's about it for tonight. Now, I want you to practice and think about what we've done here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll go through CPR, bleeding, and poisoning. Same time?
Same place.
Okay, but before I go, let's go over what we just learned.
This girl suddenly begins to cough. She clutches her throat. She's choking on some food. She can't stop. Should you? Slap her hard on the back 4 times. Attempt an abdominal thrust. Do nothing. Check her pulse. The answer is do nothing. As long as the victim is coughing, there's a good chance the object will be expelled naturally.
Well, if you have to do homework, this is definitely the way.
Those pajamas look like they could use some fast first aid.
I wouldn't laugh, darling. Your mother gave me these pajamas.
Oh, what lovely pajamas.
Okay, now lie down flat.
Okay.
I come home from working hard for you down at that TV station, and I find you unconscious on the kitchen floor.
So you step over me and make yourself a sandwich.
Quiet, you are unconscious. I look and I tap you on the shoulder. Honey, you all right? You all right? There's no answer. I call for help. Help! Then I do the airway step. I hand under your neck, hold your back, and then I check for breathing. I listen, look, and feel. No, you're not breathing. So then I do the quick step. 4 quick breaths. Pinch your nose and blow 4 quick breaths into your mouth. Mwah, 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 mwah. Then I have to check for breathing and pulse. Pulse, wait, yeah, pulse, and breathing. There is a pulse, but you are not breathing. So then I have to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I can really relate to this here. Hand under your neck, pinch the nose, 1 breath every 5 seconds. Mwah. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. 1,000, 2,
You're
1,000.
crazy.
3,
I'm breathing.
Well, I saved your life. What do you want? What?
Let me try something.
What?
Get up.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
Your turn.
What?
Okay. Now, you just swallowed a fish.
I swallowed what?
A goldfish.
Great.
You're in bad trouble. You can't talk and you're not coughing. Okay. And I bend you over by putting my hand on your manly chest and give you 4 back blows, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey.
But you still got problems.
Great.
So I give you abdominal thrusts. I stand to the side. All right, slightly to the back of you.
Wait, time out. You just put, yeah.
Like so?
No, put your hand like this. Right, like that.
Okay.
Down here, okay.
And 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm saved.
Joy to the world.
Okay, sit down. Do you feel like I do about knowing all this stuff? Doesn't it make you feel good?
You know, I do. I really hope I never have to use the knowledge, but I really feel good about it. But,
What?
those pajamas, they need help.
Oh, see, now I got to bop you with the pillow now.
Oh, really?
This completes the first of 3 sections in your first aid video kit. Because there is so much information, we recommend that you take the time now to review the material you have already screened and leave the new material for some other time.
Well, tonight we're going to take on CPR, bleeding, and poisoning. And in case you haven't caught on, we're following the basic principles that we talked about last night. And they are?
Don't move the victim, restore breathing and heartbeat, control bleeding, treat poisoning, prevent shock, get medical help.
It's good. Right, now last night we dealt with treating for shock and mouth-to-mouth breathing and choking. Now tonight we'll start with CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, a combination of mouth-to-mouth and chest compressions. Now I want to emphasize that we never practice CPR on a person. We always use a mannequin like Ms. Annie or something like a basketball.
Where do I find a basketball with no pulse?
Well, you keep still. When a subject makes Joe nervous, he tells jokes, or tries to.
As I've said, when we finish these sessions, you should all take further study at a local Red Cross chapter. Now, that is especially true of CPR technique. You can't be too good at it. The more you practice, the more skill and confidence you'll develop. Now, Annie could be anybody. Oh, say you're out for a walk, and you see an elderly man walking along. Suddenly, he falls to the ground next to the road. Linda, what would you do?
I would size up the situation, compose myself, tap his shoulder and ask, "Are you all right?"
And there's no response.
I'd shout for help. Help!
Yeah.
Airway step.
Right. Now look, listen, and feel. Okay? There's no breathing. Now what?
The quick step.
Good. Right.
And check for pulse. For 5 seconds.
Right. And breathing with your face down.
Okay.
Good. Now there's no breathing and no pulse. Now work quickly, Linda. What's next?
Mouth to mouth, right?
But the victim has no pulse.
That's right. And no pulse is the key signal for CPR, the combination of mouth-to-mouth breathing and chest compressions. But in order for chest compressions to be effective, we need the victim lying on his back against a hard surface. Now we want to get the blood flowing to his brain, so his head should be level with or lower than his heart.
Bob, what if the victim has been placed on a bed or something soft?
Well, you should get him onto the floor on his back. You need a firm surface.
Okay, but where on his chest do I press?
Well, here's a quick way to find the best place to give chest compressions, Linda. Now, using the hand nearest to the feet, find the lower end of the rib cage.
Here. I got
Okay?
it.
Now, with your middle finger and index finger, trace the edge of his ribs to the notch where they meet, the breastbone. Right in the center of the lower chest.
Okay.
Now, keep your middle finger on the notch. Place your index finger next to it on the lower end of the breastbone. Now, put the heel of your other hand on the breastbone next to your index finger.
Like this?
All right? Now, that's the spot, remember, where we found the breastbone, we learned about choking? Now, for abdominal thrusts, we were careful to push below it. For CPR, we're back on it in a very specific place. Everybody, try to find the spot for CPR chest compressions on your body. All right? Okay, now you're ready to give CPR. Linda, the heel of your hand is on the spot. Now, put your other hand on top of it, like this, okay? Now remember, good, you're keeping your fingers up. That's the right way to do it. Finger pressure can break ribs. Always use the heel of the hand.
Yeah, but my arms aren't very strong.
Well, your body weight and posture will make up for that. Now, don't sit back on your heels. Get up on your knees. Place your knees about shoulder width apart. That's right. Keep your elbows straight. Now, with your shoulders directly over the breastbone and your hands along the midline of your body, push straight down. Go ahead.
Okay.
Use your body weight when you push. And bend from your hips, not from your knees. Good. Push straight down and hard enough to compress the chest of an adult 1.5 to 2 inches. Now push smoothly. Don't jerk or jolt. Now between compressions, you rest your hands lightly on the victim's chest.
How many compressions do I give?
Well, you give 15 compressions, a little faster than 1 a second. All right? You're going to count like this. Ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and go ahead.
5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
Right.
Okay, so what happens after 15 compressions?
All right, then you give 2 quick breaths. Now, go ahead and try it. Good. Now, that's the rhythm. 15 compressions.
1 and 2 and 3
And 2
and
full
4
breaths.
and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8
Now, you move
and
as quickly
9,
as you can
10
between the two
and
positions.
11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
Now, after 4 cycles of the 15 compressions and 2 breaths, you take 5 seconds to check for pulse and breathing. Go ahead and do that.
If there's a pulse, do you continue CPR?
Well, if there's a pulse, you stop CPR immediately. If there's pulse but no breathing, you give the mouth-to-mouth but stop the compressions. And always keep checking until help arrives.
Well, suppose you're alone with the victim. How do you call for help?
Well, you keep up CPR for 1 minute. Now, that first minute's really crucial. If nobody comes with help and you get no sign of pulse or breath, stop CPR and try to make that call for help. But do it fast. And get back to the victim and continue CPR until help arrives.
It's really a race with the clock.
Yeah, and that makes it important for you to feel confident and keep your head. Practice gives you that confidence and skill. Okay, Linda, that was well done. Joe, you want to take her place? Okay, first Joe checks to see if the victim is unconscious.
Are you all right?
The victim is unconscious. Joe yells for help.
Help!
Okay, next, Joe employs the airway step. Good, Joe. He looks, listens, and feels for breathing. There's no breathing, so he employs the quick step. Good. Then he checks for pulse and breathing. Good, with the left hand. There's no pulse.
Did someone call for an ambulance?
Joe positions himself for CPR. Now, watch his posture, on his knees with the knees spread, leaning directly over the victim's chest. He feels for the rib breastbone juncture, distances the heel of his hand about 2 fingers width from the trouble spot at the bottom of the breastbone. Good, Joe. He places his hands in the correct position for CPR. Now, he's not going to press with his fingers, right? His elbows are straight. He'll use body weight to push straight down with enough pressure to depress the chest between 1.5 and 2 inches. Go ahead. Joe works smoothly, giving 15 compressions a little faster than 1 a second.
8 and 9 and 10, 11 and 12 and 13, 14, 15.
A little slower. Now, Joe gives 2 quick breaths.
I forgot to
Okay,
hold the
no,
note.
that's okay. Go ahead, Joe. Good. And starts another cycle.
1 and 2 and 3
Back
and
straight.
4 and
Good.
5
Bend from the
and
waist.
6 and 7
Arms straight.
8
Good.
and 9 and 10 and
A little
11
slower.
12 and 13
Good.
and 14 and 15.
Now 2 quick breaths. Good. And another cycle.
1 and 2 and 3
No, it's hard work.
and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and
Good.
10, 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
2 breaths. Good.
Oh.
And back to the compression.
Oh, okay. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and
Good.
9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
2 more breaths. Then look, listen, and feel. Right?
Wait, I have to keep my hand on
Right. That's good. Check for pulse. Yeah. Pretty hard work, huh?
Oh, boy.
How's Mrs. Annie?
Well, a lot better. She's breathing again.
We did it.
That's right. Now, I'm going to repeat myself. When you practice CPR, always practice on a mannequin or some object like a pillow or a basketball.
You come upon a person lying on the floor. You tap and ask,
Are you okay? Are you okay?
and get no response. You shout.
Help!
You open the airway and check for breathing. There is none. You do a quick step. Check pulse and breathing. There is a faint pulse, but no breathing. Why should you start mouth to mouth and not CPR? You should never start CPR when there is a pulse, even a weak one. You should start mouth-to-mouth breathing immediately. Remember, should breathing or pulse return, stop CPR. But keep checking the victim's condition and always get medical help as soon as possible. It is strongly recommended that you enroll in a CPR course in your community. Your Red Cross chapter can help you find a convenient CPR course.
Okay, let's move on to bleeding.
This is one session I could miss. I can't stand the idea of blood.
He'd like to be filled with vegetable soup.
Come on, blood is blood.
That's what bothers me.
Joe, a lot of people have a strong aversion to the subject, but think back to some event where knowing what to do might have made a big difference.
Linda, like the time your mother slashed her hand on that pitcher. Oh, she lost a ton of blood.
She was trying to stuff a bag of trash into a full garbage can. Yeah, but she forgot that the pieces of pitcher were inside. She pushed down on the bag and she shoved her hand right into the broken glass. It went straight into her palm. My mother was the only one who didn't panic, but it took a lot of stitches.
I'd have moved to the next county. My friends and relatives can do anything except bleed near me.
Joe, suppose your kid got into an accident. I mean, would you tell him, I'm sorry, but this is where I cut out?
Oh, of course not. I'd do whatever it took. But I'd have to.
That's right, Joe. By remembering what we learn in these sessions and practicing the techniques, if your kid or anyone else is hurt, you'll be the one who can help him. Now, keep remembering that you're not the one who's bleeding, and that often helps distance you from the situation. Now, I hope that the sight of blood won't stop you from taking on that responsibility.
I'm here, aren't I?
Tonight, it wasn't easy.
So, let's take on the subject of bleeding. Okay, we've learned that if the victim is unconscious, breathing and heartbeat have got to get the first attention. Now, after that, we worry about blood loss. Severe bleeding has got to be controlled, so we check for bleeding as soon as we can. Usually it's pretty obvious.
I've read that you can lose a lot of blood and keep going, and that bleeding usually looks a lot worse than it is.
Well, did you ever knock over a glass of water at a table? Remember how it seems to spread everywhere, under every dish, soaks the napkins, drips onto the floor?
Oh, yeah.
And all that mess was caused by one small glass of water, a few ounces. You get my point? A little blood can cause a lot of unnecessary panic.
No, knowing that does make bleeding less scary. But, Bob, controlling bleeding is the third basic principle. It's still important even though there's not much blood involved, right?
Right. Getting breathing and heartbeat going are the only things that take precedence over stopping blood loss. Now, the most effective way to control bleeding is by a simple method of direct pressure. The first step is to find a pad of clean, preferably sterile cloth, and apply it to the wound. You then take the palm of your hand and apply pressure to that pad and the wound.
What if there's no pad of cloth around?
Well, then you use only your hand.
You mean to touch the person with your bare hands?
Well, that's what I mean, but try to have someone get something for you to use.
Well, what if the pad gets all bloody?
Don't remove it. If you do, you'll be disturbing the clotting action that's been going on. Get more pads of cloth or gauze and use the new one over the first one. And use even more pressure. You're trying to help the blood to clot. The pressure reduces the blood flow and helps our own natural clotting process to start.
Well, how hard should you press?
hard enough to slow the bleeding, and keep the pressure on until medical help arrives, or you get the victim to a hospital.
That's all there is to it?
Well, in most cases, yes. Direct pressure is the safest and generally most effective way to control bleeding. And there's something else, too, elevation. In situations where the bleeding is really heavy.
I don't understand what you mean, elevation?
Well, it's really quite simple. If, without causing any additional pain to the victim, you can raise the part that's bleeding higher than the heart, see, the elevation, gravity, and pressure all work together to ease the bleeding.
Shouldn't a bad wound be cleaned out before you do anything else?
Well, I have some rules for bad wounds, and they go this way. Don't try to clean the wound. Don't remove the pressure pad placed directly onto the wound. Treat for shock and get medical help.
Well, Bob, how do you know if a wound is serious enough to need a doctor? It seems to me like it takes a judgment call each time. There are no hard and fast rules.
Well, you're right, there aren't. But it's almost always better to play it safe and get medical help.
Well, what about everyday cuts? Shouldn't you be able to deal with them alone? What's the treatment? Do they need to be cleaned out?
Well, as a rule, yes, they should be cleaned. But as for treatment, what do you usually do when this happens?
Well, I'd wash my hands with soap and water before I do anything. Then I'd wash around the wound and the area around it. I guess I'd blot it dry and apply a bandage or dressing.
Remember, the dressing should be both dry and sterile.
But isn't an infection the real danger of an open wound, regardless whether it's big or small?
Yep, and if you feel that a wound isn't healing, get a doctor to take a look at it.
Oh, I've seen some terrible wounds where the darndest things get stuck in the puncture, like pieces of machine, tools, and in a case like that, shouldn't you just pull those things out?
Sounds like you should get medical help right away.
Well, you should, but you should never try to remove the object because you may do more damage by pulling it out.
Oh, what about tetanus, especially if it comes from something like a rusty nail?
Well, I thought people have immunity for 5 years from the time of the last shot. Well, that's why I've always kept a record of my immunizations.
Well, keeping a record's a good idea, and yes, you're right, tetanus immunity does last for 5 years. But if there's any doubt, the doctor will prescribe a shot.
Well, I hope I never have to face a bleeding emergency, but, well, at least now I'll know the basic steps. It makes me feel in control. Not a bad feeling.
Well, you're right there. And now I'd like to try something with you, Joe. I'd like you to make up a situation and put yourself in the picture, and let's see you use what we've learned so far.
Okay, I got it. I go out with a little crew. I'm going to interview a lottery winner. $1 million lottery. The woman won all this money, and everybody's happy about it, right? So we come up to the house. I knock on the door, and the woman comes out.
Hi.
Mrs. Thorndike.
Yes.
Mrs. Isidore Thorndike?
Yes.
The $1 million lottery winner.
Yes, that's me. Hi.
Joe Winslow, Television News.
Oh.
Listen, I want to talk to you on camera for a couple of minutes.
So I turn away or something like that, and when I look back...
Hi, the news. Oh. Oh.
Her knees buckle. Down she goes.
She's bleeding. Listen, go see if you can find a phone and get the emergency squad down here right away.
I tell the cameraman to get some help. I find a pad. Oh, I use my clean handkerchief, and I apply direct pressure to her wound. I've got to keep her warm because, you know, the shock. It's chilly out there. And the bleeding slows.
Okay, Joe, that was good. Now, I noticed that the blood didn't make you panic.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Well, I kept thinking of Linda's spilled glass, actually, and that I was in control.
This woman has been severely cut on her hand. What should you do first? Quickly wash the cut. Treat for shock. Apply direct pressure to the wound. Call for medical help. The first thing to do is to apply direct pressure to the wound. It is a deep one and you should not wash it out. You would then treat for shock and get medical help.
I don't think Joe slept 2 hours that night.
Well, it was pretty unnerving.
Well, especially with a child involved.
I mean, the man called me over to his house to talk about a news special. this is something that we were working on, and I remember thinking how peaceful the place was. Everything was in place, really comfortable. And not 10 feet away, this kid was committing suicide. I mean, she couldn't have been more than 5 years old, and there was this bottle of blood pressure pills sitting on the shelf. And she gulped them down. Now, thank the Lord his wife came in when she did.
What are you doing?
It's lucky she saw the cause of the poisoning, the pills. It could be a lot worse when you can't identify the source.
Like if the victim is unconscious.
Exactly. And there is a difference in how you treat poisoning victims if they're conscious or unconscious. If the victim is conscious, the first thing you do is to dilute the poison with water. An adult gets a glass, a child half that amount, in sips. Your next move is to call the Poison Control Center. Now, that's a number you should keep handy. Now, if you don't have access to a Poison Control Center, call your city's emergency number or a hospital. Tell them quickly that you're dealing with a case of poisoning. If you can identify the poison, so much the better. Treatment will largely depend on what kind of substance was involved.
And if the victim is conscious, he might be able to tell you what it was he ate.
Right. Maybe there are bottles or containers lying around that would give you clues.
Good. And save the bottle. It may have important information.
Oh, aren't you supposed to get the victim to throw up?
Well, only if poison control tells you to. So, with a conscious victim, 1, dilute the poison with water. 2, call poison control. 3, identify the poison if you can. Ask the victim or look for a bottle or container that might be the source. Anything else you can think of?
The basic principles again. Try not to move the victim. Take action to prevent shock.
You're getting good at this, Hank. And if the victim is unconscious?
The airway step. Check for breathing. Oh, and if there's no breathing, the quick step. Then check breathing and pulse.
And if there's no breathing, then give mouth to mouth. And if there's no pulse and no breathing, then give CPR.
Wait, if they're unconscious, how can you be sure poison is involved?
Well, you wouldn't be able to tell, not at first. So, what would you do first?
Like Hank said, you check breathing and pulse.
That's right. And if there was no indication of any other cause of unconsciousness, you begin to think this might be a case of poisoning. I mean, look for clues, smell the breath, for strong odors like gasoline or kerosene. If nobody's around who knows what happened and the victim is unconscious, look for evidence, like an empty bottle or burns around the mouth that would indicate that a person swallowed strong chemicals.
Or people can also be poisoned by inhaling fumes or gases.
Or absorbing poisons through the skin or injections.
Right. Try to figure out what might have happened, but don't spend too long at it. This person might be dying.
So what is the treatment for an unconscious poison victim?
If the victim is breathing and has a pulse, don't try to give liquids. Turn him on his side so fluids will drain out of his mouth. Watch breathing and pulse, and definitely get medical help. If there's no breathing or pulse,
Give CPR.
and fast.
Well, what about poison gases?
Well, if the victim is in a closed room like a garage, take a deep breath before you go in and get the victim to fresh air. Then do your airway step, quick step, and check breathing and pulse. Then mouth to mouth or CPR if either is necessary.
I read that people who take in certain poisons go into convulsions.
Well, it's not uncommon.
Well, then you put something in their mouth to keep them from biting their tongue, right?
No, Hank. You don't try to restrain the victim. Just make sure he won't hurt himself by hitting furniture or hard objects.
God, that would terrify me.
Well, you do need to be careful. Someone with severe convulsions can not only hurt himself, but he can hurt you as well. When the convulsion is over, loosen tight clothing at the neck and the waist. Check for breathing, check for pulse. Turn the victim on his side with his head turned to allow any fluids to drain from the mouth. And, as always, get help as fast as you can.
The ironic thing is that most cases of poisoning can be prevented just by anticipating trouble, right? Make sure poisons are labeled distinctly and that they're kept far away from any place where someone might mistake them for something you can eat or drink.
Especially keep them away from children. I think of that whenever I try to open one of those child-proof bottles. I guess it's worth the battle.
Let's take time to check what we've learned, okay?
Grandpa's eyes are failing. He took the wrong medicine and too much of it. Then he collapsed unconscious. What should you do first? Induce vomiting? Attempt to dilute the poison? Check for burns around mouth or gasoline on breath? Get victim up and walking. The answer is you should take none of those steps. You should immediately check for signs of breathing stoppage and heartbeat and treat as necessary. Call for medical help. Take steps to prevent shock and position the victim on his side to allow for drainage of mouth fluids.
Hey, I got it.
Shh. You didn't wake him?
No, I could have emptied his treasure box, his stuffed orangutan, and everything else. Well, here's our victim.
Oh, well, do you think we can save him?
I don't know, Doctor. My problem is, where is his mouth?
I'm not gonna do mouth-to-mouth on that ball. We'll do compressions.
Well, where's his breastbone?
You're the jock. Just do it over the label.
Right.
Okay.
You first, I'll call for help. Or maybe I should call for an air pump.
Okay, let's see. On my knees. My hands like so.
All right.
Avoid finger pressure and
Keep your back
begin. Okay, and I begin a smooth, strong rhythm like this.
Okay.
1
Don't bend from the knees.
and 2 and 3.
Oh, it's like that mannequin doesn't roll around
4.
like this.
Yeah, I really want to take that Red Cross CPR course so I can work on the mannequin.
Okay, well, for one
5.
thing, now you're pressing too slow.
6.
Now, the rhythm is a little more than 1 per second. Now, here, I'll count for you.
Okay.
And 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, and 11, and 12, and 13, and 14, and 15.
And 1, 2, and 3, and 4.
Now, you do the
and
whole
5,
cycle 4
and 6,
times. It'll
and
take about a
7,
minute.
And 8,
And
9,
then you check
10,
for breathing.
11, and
for
12,
pulse.
and 13, and 14, and 15. 2 quick breaths, and then check for a pulse. Hey, it's alive. And it's breathing. I look, listen, and feel first, though, to make sure it's breathing. Hey, we did it.
Hey, bravo! Hey, congratulations. You just saved the life of a basketball. Next step, brain surgery.
Oh, come on. It's a lot better than what I could have done yesterday.
Oh, honey, come here. Come here. I want you to take a look at all those time bombs in there.
Well, most of the pill bottles have safety caps on them.
Now, you know the kids are smarter than safety caps.
Well, honey, the medicine cabinet is the place for medicines.
Yeah, I wish
Where should
somebody...
we keep them?
I don't know. I wish somebody would design a medicine cabinet with a lock on it right here.
Not a bad idea.
Unless we put one on here, I think we ought to find a different place to store all these things. At least until the kids grow up and get married and we have a couple of grandchildren.
You know, we should also check the kitchen under the cabinets.
With all the detergents and bleaches, you're right.
Also poison.
You know, if we keep this up, the kids just may have a chance to grow up and be healthy. And I'm going to tell you something. You are going to be a fantastic-looking grandmother.
Oh, well, okay, Grandpa.
Oh, let's go down, Grandma.
This is the end of the second part of this 3-part tape. We urge you to stop the tape right now and check danger spots in your home where potential poisons like medicines and chemical products are kept. Make them childproof. Don't wait for an accident to happen. Then review this section of the tape. Memorize the information and practice the procedures you've seen demonstrated. If an accident happens, you won't have time to consult a tape. When you've mastered this section, go on to the next and review the entire tape at least twice a year.
You know, it really doesn't matter how many times I pick up this coffee cup, I never learn. I mean, these cups are out to get me.
But if your coffee isn't hot, you'd complain.
Hot coffee and burning hands seem to go together.
Yeah, burns are one of the most common types of injury. Let's talk about them first tonight. Then we'll move on to fractures, some familiar emergencies, and finally we'll talk about preventing the most common accidents. Now, Hank, suppose you did what I think we've been all known to do. Pick up a hot grill out in the backyard. What would you do?
I don't know. After swearing a bit, I guess I'd put something like Vaseline on my hands.
No good. Burns need air to heal.
That's right, Charlotte. So what would you do?
Well, use ice water.
Well, you were going great there for a while.
Warm water?
Close, but no cigar.
Well, what then?
Cold water.
That's what I said.
Cold water, not ice water. Now, ice would tend to damage the already damaged tissue. Submerge the burned area in cold water. Now, that's the best immediate first aid for most burns. Remember that. Now, for further treatment, you've got to know something about the kind of burn you're dealing with.
First, second, third degree burns. I remember that. But I forgot the difference.
Well, burns are classified by depth or degree of severity. The categories are first, second, and third degree. Now, these can actually be different degrees within the same burn area, and they're treated in special ways.
First degree burns are the mildest, right?
That's right. A first degree burn is the kind you get with a mild sunburn, from brushing hot pots and pans, or from spilling hot coffee in your lap. They're the mildest degree of burns, but you've got to take them seriously.
Well, do different degrees of burns look different?
Well, they sure do. Here, why don't we take a look? Now, typical signs of a first degree burn are redness, mild swelling and pain. Now, these burns tend to heal rapidly. All right, second degree burns, the kinds that come from deep sunburn, flash burns caused by gasoline or kerosene. Now, they're more painful than first degree burns. See, they produce blisters around the burned area. There may be a wet appearance on the surface of the burn that's caused by a loss of body fluid. Now, the treatment for first and second degree burns is essentially the same, as long as the blisters aren't open. Immerse the burned area in cold water until the pain eases. Or you should apply a clean cloth that's been dipped in cold water and wrung out. Later, use a sterile gauze or a clean cloth as dressing.
Can't I buy household sprays for burns?
Yes, you can use them on mild first degree burns, but don't use spray on second degree burns with open blisters. Cold water, a clean, dry dressing, that's the best first aid. Don't try to break the blisters or remove any of the burned skin. Let healing occur naturally. Now, if the burn covers a large area, or if it doesn't seem to be healing properly, consult a doctor. Now we come to the really bad burns. For third degree burns, always get medical help. Now, third degree burns are the burns caused by flame, burning clothing, contact with boiling water, electricity, or the hot coils of an electric stove. And major burns. The signs are deep skin destruction, a white or charred look to the skin. Now, these are burns that you should not try to treat without medical help. But if you're the first on the scene, there are some things you should do and some things you should not do. Now, you start with the 6 principles.
Don't move the victim unless you have to. Restore breathing and heartbeat. Control bleeding. Treat for poisoning. Prevent shock. And send for medical help.
Now, shock is very likely in cases involving burns. Especially keep that in mind. Then, while you're waiting for medical help, cover the area with a dry, thick, sterile dressing or a clean sheet. Now, it's cover, not bandage. Some things you shouldn't do. Don't submerge the burn in water. With third degree burns, this could increase the risk of infection. And don't remove any charred clothing. You might be doing more harm than good.
Well, I hear more and more stories about chemical burns, accidents where some burning agent gets onto the clothing and skin.
Now, while I just said don't remove clothes in third degree burns caused by flame and heat, the key to treating chemical burns is to get the chemical off the skin and clothes. Use a lot of water. Wash away as much as you can while you remove the clothing. Get it away from the wound.
Bob, what happens when a burning chemical gets into the eye? I suppose the same principle applies, right?
That's right. You want to wash away the chemical. Now, you run a gentle stream of lukewarm water over the eye. Now, you be sure that the water hits the nose first and then runs over the eye and runs away from the eye that you're washing the chemical out of.
Why do you do it that way?
Well, see, that way the chemical that you're washing away, see, doesn't go over the nose and into the other eye.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, next, you cover the eye with a loosely applied dressing of sterile gauze and get medical attention.
You'd think in this day and age that they would have found a way to make us all fireproof.
Well, the truth is, many burn injuries can be prevented before they happen if we use some educated common sense. We'll talk about prevention in some detail later on, okay?
This victim splashed detergent into her eye and has a chemical burn. What should you do? Irrigate the eye with a solution of baking soda and water. Flood the eye with plain water for 15 minutes. Keep victim's eyes closed. Put victim's head in a bowl of water. The correct answer is flood the eye with plain water for 15 minutes to remove any remaining chemical. Next, bandage the eye with sterile gauze and get medical help.
Well, let's move on and talk about fractures, a break or crack in a bone, and certainly among the most common injuries.
Tell me about it. You know, last summer, my kid, little Tarzan, was swinging from the tree out in the backyard. And he was about 10 feet up when he slipped.
He went flying. But he broke his arm just below the elbow.
No, see, this was just a plot to get out of mowing the lawn.
Fractures seem to go with athletic kids.
Well, not only athletic kids, breaks can happen any place. A fall, a car crash, on a ball field, name it. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're dealing with a fracture. Only an X-ray can see the break.
Then how do you know there is a break?
Well, most of the time it's not that obvious, so be safe. Treat the injury as if you were dealing with a fracture and let a doctor check it out. And the biggest thing to remember about treating fractures is to keep the area immobilized. Now, this is especially true if you have to move a victim to a hospital. Movement is the worst enemy when it comes to fractures.
But if you know there's a broken bone under the skin, shouldn't you try and set it?
No, you can severely complicate the problem. See, setting broken bones is the doctor's job.
I'm just as glad anyway.
Okay, there are two types of fractures, closed and open. Now, an open fracture is more serious because you have a broken bone and an open wound that might be bleeding.
So what do you do? Do you apply pressure to control the bleeding, even though you might be disturbing the fracture?
Well, in these cases, you have to evaluate what's the most serious immediate danger to the victim. For now, think about the basic principles, especially because with so severe a wound, the victim might be unconscious.
So first you restore breathing and heartbeat.
Control bleeding.
Then look for fractures. With open fractures, bleeding is often more of a problem than the break. Your first attention must be to the wound. Now first, remove or cut away any clothing over the wound. If there's bleeding, carefully apply direct pressure with a large, thick, hopefully sterile compress. Now that should stop the blood. Then bandage the compress in place. Open fractures infect easily, so don't touch the wound with your fingers or even try to wash it. And again, don't try to set the bone or disturb any bone chips or fragments. If bits of bone or skin have been detached, put them in a dry, airtight container and send them to the hospital along with the victim. And try to keep the break immobilized.
What about slings?
And splints.
Well, they have the same purpose, to immobilize the area. The whole subject of how to make splints and slings is complicated, since breaks can come virtually anywhere on the body. It's something you can best learn by doing, under the eye of a trained Red Cross instructor, in an advanced course. Well, we've covered breathing, bleeding, breaks, burns, and poisons. And I know you guys go home and do your homework, right?
Absolutely.
What do you think? Sure.
All right, tonight I thought we'd end our sessions together by touching on some very common injuries, the little emergencies that happen around the house or on vacation. Let's go around the room. Start with Linda.
How about when one of the kids comes running in and says, "Mom, my nose is bleeding"?
Well, nosebleed. It's usually not serious unless nosebleeds recur, and they're usually brought on by some strenuous activity after a cold or in high altitudes. Walking, talking, laughing, blowing the nose, or disturbing the clotting can make them worse or start the bleeding again. So, first, keep the victim quiet. Place him in a sitting position, leaning forward. Now, if that's impossible, place him in a reclining position with the head and shoulders raised. Now, you apply direct pressure at the site of the bleeding by pressing the bleeding nostril at the midline.
Like this.
Exactly right. You apply cold compresses to the victim's nose and face. Now, if it keeps bleeding, get medical attention.
You surprised me.
I thought you leaned the victim back and put ice at the back of the neck.
Well, that's what most people seem to think, but it's better to apply direct pressure right on the nose. Okay, now let's focus on another familiar emergency. Hank?
How about electric shock? The kind I get from appliances with short circuits?
Well, the biggest danger with electrical shock is respiratory failure and possible heart stoppage. Now, if you follow the 6 principles, you'll check for breathing and pulse. Apply what you've learned about breathing and CPR if necessary. Treat for shock and look for any other wounds and problems. Now, your action depends on the severity of the various things you find.
So it's really a combination of treatments for breathing, heartbeat, shock, and burns.
Gets back to basics.
Well, you'll find that they apply to most situations. Charlotte?
Well, Bob, one of the things that spooks me is when somebody gets something in an eye. I never know what to do.
First, keep the victim from rubbing the eye. Now, that can cause more irritation or embed a foreign object deeper in the eye. And before you examine the eye, wash your hands. You see, getting something in your eye can be a simple annoyance or much more serious. There are really 2 situations. 1, something on the surface, and 2, something embedded in the eye. If the object is caught on the surface of the eye, you can usually spot it on the surface of the eyeball or the inner surface of the eyelid. Pull down the lower lid and look for the object on the inner surface. If you can see the object, lift it gently with the corner of a clean handkerchief or soft paper tissue. Never use dry cotton. Now, if that doesn't work, try to flush it out with lukewarm water. If you can't get it out, or if it's embedded in the eye, cover both eyes and get medical help fast. Oh, Hank?
One of my biggest fears, believe it or not, is bugs. Insect stings. I'm allergic to stings, and during the summer months I carry an allergy kit my doctor gave me. 1 sting from a bee and I'll get hives, be wheezing, and get some other awful respiratory reaction.
Anyone who knows they're allergic should get a kit from a doctor and learn how to use it. Those symptoms you described are very common reactions to bee stings, and bad reactions happen fast, within the first 15 minutes. If severe symptoms develop, call a doctor.
And what about animal bites?
Well, for a small animal bite, wash with soap and water and bandage the wound. But for any animal bite, get medical attention.
Big emergencies, small emergencies. This first aid knowledge really covers the spectrum. And it feels good to know some of the key things to do.
Sure does, Joe.
Okay, well, that just about wraps up the major types of injuries and procedures. I think we should have some type of review here. Review everything that we've covered so far.
I've got an idea. Why don't you let Linda and Charlotte come up with one of your stories?
Yeah, something like the burning of Atlanta scene from Gone with the Wind.
And maybe if we do it that way, we'll never have to do it again in real life.
Well, okay. Who starts it off?
Charlotte?
Let's see. It was one of those mornings
And Charlotte and I are sitting around having coffee.
when suddenly...
Oh, my God. Look.
You check her, I'll check the driver.
Are you all right? Are you all right? Sir, are you all right? Are you all right? He's not breathing. I can't find a pulse either. I'm going to have to start CPR. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Are you okay? What happened to us? Where's my dad? Where's my daughter? Are we okay? What happened?
Relax.
15. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my God! Look at my arm.
Relax. Put your hand down. All right. I'm going to apply pressure. Be calm. I need your other arm. Okay. I want you to hold it very tight.
14, 15.
Relax. Take it easy. I'm going to go away for 1 second. But I'm going to be right back. Okay? Stay still. I'll be right back.
8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
I need you to call the emergency squad. Tell them what happened, where we are. Tell them 3 victims are involved. One's heart has stopped and CPR is being given. And please, please don't hang up until they have all the information they need.
14 and 15.
Hey, there's a pulse. There's a pulse. I did it.
Just fine. Don't worry about a thing. Here they come right now. There they are.
Well, you all have learned quite a bit.
And I, for one, feel a whole lot more comfortable with the whole business of emergencies.
And that's why we're here, right? Your home should be your castle. It should be a place of safety and pleasure for the people who live there. You know, it's often the opposite. Statistics show that your home can be as dangerous as a battlefield.
You mean because of accidents waiting to happen?
Accidents that some common sense can prevent.
Exactly. The best defense against accident is common sense and awareness of the potential trouble spots like loose rugs on the stairs or toys left to cause falls.
Something about an ounce of prevention
It's
is
worth a pound of Band-Aids.
Now, this could be anybody's home. Let's wander around in it and see how we can make it safer.
Let's go to the kitchen.
If you use matches to light the stove, make sure they're extinguished before you toss them into a wastebasket. If you see an octopus like this overloaded electric socket, remember, overloading causes overheating, and that can cause fire.
See these pot handles? Don't leave them sticking out. You or a child could end up getting scalded. Face handles inward.
If a grease fire starts in a pan or the stove, don't use water or flour to put it out. Starve the fire of oxygen. Put the lid on the pan. Close the oven door. If the fire persists, use baking soda to smother it. A fire extinguisher for grease fires is essential kitchen equipment.
When you get into the bath or shower, check the water first. You'd be amazed at how many people end up with serious burns or worse.
Right, one way to prevent scalding water burns is to check the temperature of the hot water tank. Make sure it can't get too hot.
Please be careful before you put a kid in a tub, and always supervise the child in the bath. If the phone rings, let it.
You know about cabinets that hold poisonous materials. You keep them locked.
If fuses keep blowing, don't end the problem by using heavier fuses. Find out what's causing the fuse to go. A fuse is an alarm.
Keep smoke alarms in key places. And have fire extinguishers handy in several locations.
Have family fire drills, know the escape routes, and tell kids never to hide under the bed or in the closet if the fire alarm sounds. They've got to get out fast. Teach them 2 escape routes and make them practice getting out fast.
That's really good advice, Hank. Oh, what have we here? Hank, come here, will you? Take a look at this.
What?
Huh? Oh. Now, you see this electric cord that was under the rug? Now, that's asking for big trouble. Now, friction from walking or moving furniture can fray the insulation. You can start a fire or a short circuit that can give you a bad electric shock.
Yeah, I guess you caught us on that one.
Now, what's the best safety device in the house?
I don't know.
Wait a minute.
I know. The telephone.
Right.
Keep an easily available list of emergency numbers near the phone. It's best to memorize them and get the family to do the same. Know who to call in an emergency for the quickest response. The emergency number for police, fire, ambulance, hospital, and poison control. And when you call for help,
Give complete information and never hang up first. Make sure the ear on the other end hears what it has to hear.
Look around your home. Make notes of the potential dangers, from slippery rugs to faulty furnaces, from chemical poisons in the garage to sharp knives in drawers the kids can reach. Keep staircases clear and make sure the steps aren't slippery from wax. Use your head to eliminate as many of these accident traps as you can before somebody gets hurt. Well, I think that about covers it. But before I go, I really want you to think about everything we've learned and pick out the most important thing that sticks in your mind. The most important thing to you. Hank?
Well, I guess what really sticks with me is that just a few simple things can make all the difference. Open the airway, keep them breathing, make sure they have a pulse. It's simple what you can do to save a life.
Well, for me, I think it would be to get extra medical attention, and fast.
You know, when you ask me what's the most important thing I've learned, I'd have to say I gained something. It's a sense of self-confidence that should an emergency come up, I could handle it.
You know, you're right. Whenever I used to see an accident in the street, I'd be too nervous to stop. But now, even if I didn't know exactly what to do or what was wrong, having thought all this stuff through in my mind, I think I would stop. I know I can handle a first aid situation.
You know, if we'd have known that it wasn't that difficult and that we'd have some fun doing it, we wouldn't have waited this long.
You know, for a short period of time, I'm surprised at the amount that I've learned. But I know that I'm going to want to review this stuff again and again.
Well, if you want more advanced information, you can take a Red Cross course. You know, one of the reasons I decided to teach this stuff was that I found the more I learned, the better I felt about myself.
Well, I think I speak for all of us, Bob, but thanks for taking the time to show us.
Oh, my pleasure.
This has been a CBS Fox video learning experience.